This week we're talking about God's grace, and at the beginning of the week I said that grace is the concept in the Bible that's maybe the most difficult for us to understand. In fact, grace is the idea in the Bible that by nature we as human beings find most offensive. And today we're going to see why that is. Where we left off in this story that Jesus told, everyone was busy celebrating because the father's younger son had finally come back home. Well, not everyone was celebrating. While the party was going on, the older son was out in the field, and when he heard what was happening inside the house, he became angry and upset. After all, he had never rebelled against his father the way that his younger brother had, and his father had never thrown any sort of party like this for him. In fact, everything that the father was spending on this party for his good-for-nothing younger brother was really his. Everything that the father had left was his inheritance. And so he stayed outside, angry and offended. So what would the father do now? Leave his older son outside, maybe even lock the door? Send out a servant to demand that he get back inside right this minute? No, instead the father leaves the party. The father goes outside. The father pleads with his older son to see that just as his younger son's behavior had nothing to do with his place in the family, so also the older brother's place in the family had nothing to do with his behavior either. He wanted this older brother to see that he was choosing anger and resentment and was missing out on all of the joy and all of the fun that was happening inside the house. The father said to his older son, "We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." This is our next look into the face of grace. We see that God has grace even for people who are upset by His grace. So I'll ask it one more time. Can you see yourself in this part of the story? No matter how far you've wandered from God in your life, it's probably possible for you to find someone who's wandered much farther and for much longer. In fact, you might look at your life and think that overall, you've pretty much stayed pretty close to God. Always been in church, never been in trouble with the law, always been a faithful spouse and a good parent. In fact, maybe even your rebellious stage included nothing more than jaywalking and staying out past your curfew a couple of times. And if that's the case, then you might be tempted to look at people who have wandered much farther from God than you, and you might be tempted to assume that your place in the family is directly a result of your good behavior. You might be tempted to look at the fact that they are welcomed back into the family with open arms and resent the fact that they get a place in the family that's equal to yours. If so, rest assured that God has enough grace for you too. In fact, the people that Jesus told this story to were people just like that, people who were offended and upset by God's grace for others. And in telling this story, Jesus was really doing for them the very same thing that the father in the story did for his older son. He was going out to them. He was reaching out to them. He was pleading with them to see that their place in the family was not in any way dependent on their behavior. He was urging them to see that a life where their behavior was connected to their place in the family was a life full of anger and resentment. He was pleading with them to see that a life where even the most wayward of children are welcomed back with open arms, that's where all the joy and fun are to be found. That's where the party is at. And so even when we get upset with God's grace, even when we might look up at God and be angered by the grace that He shows to others, this is the Father that we will meet. Even then, we will be staring into the face of grace.